The apple pie you made, the one with the crispy crust that I used to eat back in high school. Remember, you said, "Mom, yours tastes even better than the bakery downtown." My words hung in the air, blending with the scent of cinnamon candle burning on the shelf, that familiar smell Emily loved. Logan shifted in his seat, leaning against the armrest, the light from the Christmas tree reaching nearly to the ceiling reflecting off the buttons of his shirt. Something about his posture changed. His shoulders drew in slightly, as if bracing himself to say something difficult. "Mom. Honestly. You should come over less often. Sometimes. It's a bit of a burden." Those words hit me like an icy gust straight to the face. I blinked, thinking I must have misheard. "You said what?" "I'm a burden." Logan avoided my eyes, staring at the wooden floor I had helped pay to refinish last year when Emily complained it was too outdated. "Emily thinks it would be better if you came by less. We need our own space. You understand, right? Our own space." I looked around the room, the bookshelves I chose, the curtains I had custom-made when Emily said the afternoon sun was too bright, the leather sofa I bought on installment so, as my daughter-in-law put it, they could host guests properly. Every corner of this house carried my imprint, my time, my money, my affection. Our own space, I repeated slowly. "And whose idea was that, Logan?" He swallowed hard. "Both of ours." Through the open door to the garage, I saw the brand new white SUV, the car I bought for Emily last month so she could commute more comfortably. $38,000 from the savings it had taken me a lifetime to accumulate. So, what am I supposed to do? Sit at home and wait until I'm called for? My voice came out softer than I meant. Logan let out a small sigh. "Mom. Please don't make this hard. I just want things to be easier." I stood, my knees aching but my heart aching more. "I understand." "Mom, wait." But I had already walked down the hallway, passing the family photos on the wall where my face seemed to shrink and fade a little more each year. Hand on the doorknob, I turned back, my voice even and low, "Tell Emily. I'm taking that gift back." The December wind rushed in as I stepped out, leaving behind the warm lights of a house I had helped build but never truly belonged to. I sat in my car for a long while, hands resting on the steering wheel without starting the engine. Through the windshield, the Christmas lights from nearby houses twinkled, reflecting off the thin layer of ice on the road. Inside those windows, families were likely gathered, laughing and talking warmly. I, on the other hand, had just been told by my 37-year-old son that my presence was a burden. My phone vibrated on the passenger seat. Logan's name appeared. I let it ring, the screen lighting up and fading, over and over. I didn't answer. Instead, I put the car into gear and drove off, leaving behind the street I had once considered an extension of my own home. The road home was quiet, the only sound the tires grinding against the cold asphalt. I passed the gas station where last year Logan had called me in the middle of the night when his car broke down. I'd come immediately, bringing hot coffee and a thick blanket. That was before Emily started hinting that I shouldn't interfere in their private life. Turning onto Elm Street, I drove past the dealership where I had signed the papers for Emily's white SUV. That day, she hugged me, smiling brightly, saying, "I'll never forget this, Mom." The words had barely cooled, and now I was being politely reminded to stay away. Back at my house, I opened the garage door, staring at the empty spot where my old sedan used to park. I had sold it, using most of the money plus my savings to buy Emily's car. Now I drove a 10-year-old hatchback that rattled whenever I shifted gears. In the kitchen, the teapot I'd left from that morning still held a little cold water. I turned on the stove, listening to the soft hiss of the gas, and wondered how far I had gone, how much I had bent, just to carve out a small place in my son's life. I thought back to every expense, money to remodel the living room to fit Emily's minimalist style, contributions for the Hawaii trip to help bond the family, money for Logan when he changed jobs and needed to wait for his first paycheck. Every time, I told myself, it's fine, as long as my son is happy. But slowly, I realized the price wasn't just money. The landline phone rang, the sound echoing through the empty house. I stood still, letting it ring out until silence returned. Outside, the December wind whistled through the window cracks I hadn't repaired yet, always putting Logan and Emily's needs first. I poured myself a cup of hot tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the snow-covered yard. A simple, clear thought took shape: it was time to take back what was mine. And I knew exactly where to start. I opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out a blue folder I had kept hidden for months. Inside were receipts, invoices, and bank statements I had avoided facing. The numbers stood out like cold reminders: every payment, every transfer, every expensive gift I'd paid to help Logan and Emily settle. I began adding them up, carefully, line by line. The first year, a new refrigerator because Emily said the old one didn't match the kitchen, $2,400. The second year, the leather sofa, $5,800. The third year, a Colorado vacation, $6,200. The fourth year, down payment on the white SUV, $20,000, plus $18,000 from my savings to cover the remaining installments. Totaling over $70,000, not including the countless times I paid for car repairs, property taxes, or new furniture Emily wanted. I paused, finger resting on the calculator, eyes fixed on the number on the screen. $70,000, enough to repair my roof, replace all the windows, and still have money left for a few trips. Instead, it was sunk into a house 5 blocks away, where I was now considered a burden. I set the calculator down, a cold, hollow feeling spreading through my chest. In my mind, I saw the day I handed Emily the keys to the SUV. She hugged me, called me the best mom in the world. Yet only weeks later, "You should come by less," took its place. The phone rang again, this time shorter, as if someone was testing their luck. I didn't answer. Instead, I gathered the papers, laying them out in chronological order. Every receipt, every statement, a piece of evidence not just of the money I had lost, but of the trust and patience I had let them spend freely. When I finished sorting, I leaned back. The yellow light cast over the table highlighted the papers, a full picture of my sacrifice and how little it meant. I sipped my tea, the taste bitter with a hint of sweetness, a perfect reflection of these past years, love mixed with bitterness. I knew I couldn't reclaim the time I had lost. But the car? The brand new white SUV sitting neatly in their garage? That was something I could take back, and I would, before my kindness was turned into a joke again. I reached for my cell phone, scrolled through my contacts until I found the insurance company's number. The hold music played steadily, broken by a soft click as the agent picked up. "Hello, this is Camila from customer care. How may I help you today?" "I want to cancel the insurance on the SUV registered under my name," I said, my voice so calm it felt almost strange to myself. Camila asked a few verification questions, then her keyboard clicked rapidly. "Yes, Mrs. Flores, I see a 2023 Ford Explorer, Washington, D.C. plates, currently fully insured. You'd like to cancel immediately?" "Yes. Immediately." A short silence, as if she was waiting for me to explain why. But I said nothing more. I didn't owe anyone an explanation for this anymore. "It's done. The insurance will terminate at midnight tonight. Is there anything else you need?" "No. That's enough." I hung up, looked at the phone in my hand, then set it on the table. The house fell silent again, but this time, the quiet didn't feel heavy. It was like closing a door you knew you'd never open again, a decisive stillness. I stood, walked into the bedroom, and opened the closet to take out a small box. Inside was the spare key to the SUV, the one Emily didn't know I still kept. I turned it in my hand, the cold metal catching the ceiling light. A plan took shape in my mind, clear and simple, almost peaceful. I would go there, drive the car back, and pretend the gift was never given. Outside, snow had begun to fall gently. I pulled back the curtain, watching the flakes swirl beneath the streetlights. Somewhere across town, Logan and Emily were probably enjoying their evening, unaware of the words they had left hanging. Unaware that in just a few hours, a small change was coming, one they would never forget. I slipped the key into my coat pocket, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and pulled on leather gloves. Each movement was slow, deliberate, like I was preparing for an important meeting. When I opened the door, the December night air rushed in, sharp and cold, but inside me, a strange fire burned. Not raging anger, but something different, a sense of autonomy, of control, something I had lost long ago. I shut the door, locked it, and stepped into the garage. My old hatchback hesitated a few seconds before starting, the engine's rough roar sounding almost like confirmation. I reversed out of the driveway, heading toward the street where the white SUV waited, and for the first time in months, I felt light. The snow fell heavier as I turned onto Logan Street. Christmas lights strung along their walkway blinked steadily, reflected on the fresh blanket of snow. The white SUV sat comfortably in the open garage, as if waiting for me. I parked my hatchback across the street, cut the engine, and left the cabin lights dim. For a moment, I sat still, listening to the wind whistling through bare trees. Memories rushed back, the countless times I'd rushed over here because Emily needed someone to watch the house, because Logan needed a ride to the garage, or simply because they asked me to stop by and help out. Each time, I dropped everything. Each time, I told myself, family comes first. I opened the car door and stepped out. Snow crunched under my boots, crisp in the night. I passed the front door, the living room lights glowed, shadows moving. Emily's laughter floated out, mingled with holiday music. Without hesitation, I went around to the garage. The spare key rested firmly in my palm. One press, and the SUV's lights flashed, the lock released with a click, like an affirmation. I opened the driver's door, the smell of new leather and the hint of peppermint oil Emily loved filled the air. I slid in and started the engine, the smooth hum a stark contrast to the rattling of my old car. I glanced at the rearview mirror. From the kitchen window, Logan appeared, beer in hand, looking out. It took him a few seconds to recognize me. The beer froze mid-air. His mouth moved, forming words, then he vanished from view. Less than 10 seconds later, the garage door burst open. Logan rushed out, Emily close behind in a thin sweater. "Mom! What are you doing?" Logan yelled, his voice both panicked and angry. "I'm taking my car back," I replied, no need to raise my voice. Emily stepped forward, face flushed. "You gave me this car. You can't. A gift is still yours to keep," I cut her off, "but when someone calls you a burden, that gift loses its meaning." Logan planted himself in front of the hood. "Mom, don't do this, the neighbors are watching." I held his gaze, then turned the key. The engine growled softly, the tires began to turn. Logan was forced to step aside, his eyes wide, speechless. I drove out of the garage, turned onto the main road, leaving behind the Christmas lights and the fading echoes of their voices. As the SUV glided down the street, a wave of relief spread through me. Not because I had taken back a possession, but because I had finally taken back something else, my own boundaries. And once raised, they would never be crossed again. I reached home just before 10 o'clock. The snow had eased, but the road still shone silver with ice. I pulled the SUV into my garage, closing the door slowly as if sealing off an old chapter. The new leather scent drifted again, but this time, it had nothing to do with Emily. It was simply the smell of something that belonged to me. I turned off the engine, sat for a few seconds to steady my breathing. Not out of fear, but from a strange sensation, peace, mixed with regret for the woman I had been all those years, the one who spent tens of thousands of dollars, expecting nothing but hollow words of thanks. Inside, the warm yellow light from the kitchen welcomed me. I hung my coat, took off my gloves, and set the SUV keys on the dining table. They lay there, gleaming, a reminder that I had just claimed back a piece of control over my life. The phone buzzed on the table. Logan's name appeared, along with a short message, "Mom, what is this about?" I read it, but didn't reply. Seconds later, a call came in. I let it ring until it stopped. Then another message, longer this time, his tone a mix of anger and confusion. "Mom, you did that in front of the neighbors. Emily's embarrassed. I don't understand why you had to do this." I poured a cup of hot tea, sat by the window. Outside, the streetlight reflected off the snow, a gentle yet cold glow. I thought about the word embarrassed Logan had used. Emily was embarrassed that I took back what I had bought, but how many times had I swallowed my own humiliation when they treated me like an outsider in a home I helped build? Another call came in, this time from Emily. I silenced it, placed the phone face down. I didn't want to hear excuses, or demands to return the car. The tea cooled in my cup. Slowly, I rose and went back into the garage. In the quiet, I sat in the SUV's driver's seat, turned on the heater, and rested my hands on the steering wheel. I imagined road trips I had never allowed myself because I was always saving for family. Now, perhaps, it was finally time. Back inside, I took a sheet of paper and wrote a few lines, not to send to anyone, just to remind myself, what's mine, I must keep. And when someone pushes me out of their life, take back everything I put into it. I folded the paper, slipped it into a drawer. Outside, the night wind rose again, but inside me, everything was still, like a frozen lake in winter. The next morning, winter sunlight flooded the kitchen as I sipped my second cup of coffee. The rich aroma of freshly roasted beans filled the room, the expensive kind I had always told myself to save for a special occasion. But now, every day was an occasion. The phone buzzed at 9:15 a.m. It was Emily again. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering, and her voice immediately filled the line, tense but trying to sound calm. "Mrs. Mom, what happened last night really didn't have to be that way. We can talk." "I don't think there's anything to talk about, Emily." I took a sip of coffee. "The car is in my name. I brought it to my house. That's it." Emily's voice grew more urgent. "Do you have any idea how many people I have to explain this to today? They're asking why my car disappeared. I can't." "Maybe," I cut in, "you should tell them you told your mother-in-law to stop coming around because she was a burden. I'm sure they'll understand." Silence on the other end for a few seconds, then Emily let out a short, joyless laugh. "Do you really want to turn this into a spectacle? Fine, but remember, people will only see that you're punishing your son." "No," I replied slowly. "I'm protecting myself. If Logan's affected, that's because of the choices he made." Emily sighed, then hung up without saying goodbye. I set the phone down, feeling as if I had closed another door, and the relief was palpable. By noon, I went to the supermarket. For the first time in a long while, I bought things I actually liked without thinking, save the money for the kids. Fine cheese, fresh bread, and a bright yellow bouquet of tulips. Carrying the flowers in my hand, I felt like I was bringing a little bit of spring home, even though snow still covered everything outside. When I got back, I saw a white envelope in the mailbox. The handwriting on it was familiar, Logan's. I opened it, a few short lines, scribbled hastily. "Mom, I think I need time to understand. But I hope you don't cut everything off." I read it twice, unsure if it was a sign of regret or just another way to stall. Either way, I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer beside the note I had written last night. As evening fell, I went to the garage and sat in the SUV. I turned on the radio to my favorite country station and imagined a road trip to the Oregon coast, a place I had never been. This time, not to see anyone, not to fulfill any duty, but simply because I wanted to. I smiled to myself. Some things can be taken back, and some cannot. But the important part is knowing where to start. And I already had. 3 days later, I began the journey I had envisioned. Early morning, I packed a few sets of clothes, a thick book, and a camera into the SUV's trunk. The streets still glimmered with snow, but the skies were clear, sunlight catching on the ice like scattered mirrors. As I drove out of the city, I felt like I was leaving a cramped room and stepping into open space. No more sudden calls, no more texts asking for help, no more feeling like I had to be ready for someone else at any moment. Just me, and the road ahead. Passing through small towns, I saw diner chimneys sending up spirals of smoke, people in heavy coats chatting on porches. No one knew who I was, and I realized that made me feel freer than ever. At noon, I stopped at a quaint cafe by the river. The large windows looked out over the frozen water, where a few pigeons pecked at bread crumbs someone had scattered. I ordered a bowl of hot soup, the aroma of celery and pepper rising with the steam. As my spoon tapped against the rim, I remembered the meals I had cooked and brought over to Logan and Emily when they first moved in. Nobody asked me to do it, but I wanted to. Looking back now, I realized I had let love turn into an obligation, and that was when it lost its purity. By late afternoon, I was back on the road. The mountain highway opened up to snow-covered pines, the sky fading into a pale orange. I turned up the radio, a melancholy ballad played, and I noticed my eyes growing damp. Not from sadness, but from a quiet realization, I had missed too many moments for myself because I thought I always needed to be with others. That evening, I rented a small motel room in a coastal town. The sound of waves crashed steadily against the window. I drew back the curtain, letting the yellow streetlight blend with the deep black of the sea. In that moment, I saw more clearly than ever that loss doesn't only mean losing something, sometimes it's letting go of what you could have had. I took out my journal and wrote a few lines. No one has the right to decide my worth except me. And once I see the limits others place on me, I must never return to that place. I closed the journal, turned off the light, and let the waves lull me to sleep. For the first time in years, I slept without dreaming of faces expecting me to show up. Only the sea, and me, was enough. The next morning, I woke early to a misty sky. The waves still beat steadily as the night before, but the new light made everything less gloomy, replaced with a rare calm. I put on my coat, took my camera, and walked to the beach. The sand was cold and damp beneath my feet. Small ripples crawled up then receded, leaving silver traces on the gray shore. I snapped a few photos, nothing fancy, just to capture the fact that I was really here, in a place where no one expected or needed me to be. Back at the motel, I found a message from Logan. "Mom, where are you? I want to talk." Short, no blame, but no apology either. I read it and left it alone. This trip wasn't about fixing old problems, it was about freeing myself from them. I drove along the coast, stopping at an old lighthouse. After climbing the spiral stairs, I stepped onto the balcony overlooking the vast ocean. The wind whipped hard, stinging my eyes, but I didn't turn away. That feeling, a mix of cold and freedom, made me realize how long I had lived inside a box of expectations, of obligations, of unspoken promises I bound myself to without anyone asking. At noon, I ate at a harbor cafe, ordering grilled fish and fries. At the next table, an elderly couple laughed loudly, sharing a glass of white wine. They didn't resemble anyone I knew, but the warmth between them made me smile. They were together not out of a checklist of duties, but out of the clear joy of simply being with each other. When I returned to the motel, I finally checked my phone again. This time, Logan's message was longer. "I know I said things I shouldn't have. I just wanted to make things less tense. But if you want distance, I'll respect that." I didn't reply right away. I needed time to believe that this distance wouldn't only be respected when it was convenient for him. And because I wasn't ready to slip back into my old role, the one who always put out fires at home, even when nobody truly appreciated it. As evening fell, I sat on the balcony with a cup of hot tea. The sunset turned the entire sea orange, each wave tipped with gold. I thought, if I stayed here a few more days, the world outside would keep turning, and Logan and Emily would carry on with their lives just as they wanted. And I, for the first time, would let that happen without interfering, without holding on, without trying to fix it. I would simply stand still, and let things shape themselves. On the fourth day of my trip, I decided to leave the coastal town and drive south. The road wound along the cliffs, with the deep blue ocean on one side and dark forested mountains on the other. Sometimes I pulled over at scenic overlooks, the sea spray hitting my face, the sound of crashing waves reminding me that this world was far bigger than the worries surrounding Logan's house. I stopped at a gas station in a small town, filled the tank, and bought a hot coffee. The young attendant greeted me with a friendly smile, asking where I was from. When he learned I was on a trip with no set destination, he said, "Sounds like a dream for a lot of people." I only smiled, but inside, a warm note spread through me. Maybe he was right, this was a dream. One I once thought I didn't deserve. At noon, I stopped at a national park. The trail was carpeted with dry leaves, the smell of pine resin and damp earth blending together. Each step seemed to quiet the noise in my head. At a bend, I came across a family having a picnic, parents spreading out a blanket, children running around, laughter echoing. The scene didn't make me sad or jealous, it was just like a painting hung in a museum, beautiful, but not mine to belong to. That evening, I found a lodge at the edge of the forest. The host was an elderly woman with silver hair, bright eyes, and a warm voice. When she learned I was traveling alone, she simply nodded, "Good. Sometimes people need to hear their own voice again." That sentence stayed with me throughout the simple dinner of bread and vegetable soup. Back in my room, I found an email from Logan. Unlike his short messages before, this one was longer, telling me that since I left, the house had felt strangely empty. He said he was beginning to realize that my visits weren't because I was idle or intrusive, but because I truly believed it was what was best for them. Yet the last line still read, "I don't know how to make things go back to the way they were." I sat for a long time in front of the screen, fingers resting on the keyboard but not typing. I realized I didn't want to go back to the way things were anymore. I no longer wanted to be the one so ready to sacrifice that I forgot myself. Outside the window, darkness draped over the forest, only the sound of wind in the branches and a few distant lights from houses. I closed the laptop, blew out the lamp, letting the darkness fill the room. And in that darkness, I saw clearly, some relationships can only be saved if both people step forward. If only one person tries, what remains is just a shadow without shape, without substance. The next morning, I woke with a lingering weariness, not from a poor night's sleep, but from thoughts that hadn't yet settled. Outside, the sky was heavy gray, fog wrapping around the trees like a thick scarf. I brewed a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the droplets slide down the glass. The phone buzzed again. A message from Emily. Short, "Mom, can we talk?" No other punctuation, no explanation. I let the screen fade. I knew that if I opened that conversation now, everything I had been building for myself these past days would collapse like a sandcastle in the tide. I decided to walk into the forest behind the lodge. The paths led deep into a green haze, damp and quiet enough that I could hear my own heartbeat when I stopped. I thought about how, for years, I had walked into Logan and Emily's lives as if entering a forest, no map, no boundaries, only instinct. And when I got lost, instead of turning back, I pressed deeper, hoping to find a way out. When I returned, I found the innkeeper tending a fire in the common room. I sat beside it, warming my hands. She asked if I had found what I needed. I said I wasn't sure, but at least I had found a silence where I could hear myself. She smiled, "That silence is the rarest thing." In the afternoon, I drove to a lake nestled in the forest. The surface was still as glass, reflecting gray clouds and bare trees. I stood there a long time, until the wind stirred ripples across it. My reflection distorted, reminding me that everything changes, no matter how hard we try to keep it the same. Back in my room, I wrote a letter by hand. Not to send yet, but to clarify for myself what I wanted to say. I wrote that I love my family, but love cannot be a one-way street. I wrote that boundaries are not walls to keep us apart, but doors that must be opened by both sides with respect. And I wrote that I would not return to my old role, because if I did, everything I was trying to build for myself would vanish. When I put down the pen, it felt like placing the last stone on a road still under construction. It didn't yet lead anywhere, but the direction was clear. And that, for now, was enough. On the 6th day, the sky cleared, blue enough to see wisps of clouds drifting slowly. I decided to leave the forest and drive inland. The road cut through vast fields, old wooden fences running along both sides, small houses appearing and disappearing behind groves of trees. I stopped at a roadside cafe. Inside, the smell of freshly baked waffles mingled with strong roasted coffee. The waitress, about my age, handed me a cappuccino with a gentle smile. We chatted briefly about the weather, about how winter had come early this year. No one asked anything more, and I felt relieved by that. As I walked back to my car, I saw a young mother struggling with the seatbelt of the child in the back seat. The little one giggled when she leaned in to brush her nose against his cheek. The moment brought back memories of my own days, exhausted but joyful, finding happiness in every hug, every "Mom," Logan called out. Back then, I didn't realize that love, too, could be clouded by habit and expectation. At noon, I noticed a missed call from Logan's number. No message attached. I ignored it, then continued driving. The road brought me to an old town, red brick buildings pressed together, wooden signs hanging from small shops. I wandered through the stores and bought a dark blue wool scarf not for anyone else, but for myself. Sitting on a bench in the town square, I opened my small notebook and wrote a few lines about the journey. I wrote that with every mile I traveled, I felt less bound to the thought of needing to be needed. That I could exist and be happy without orbiting around anyone. That evening, I found a small inn, its walls painted pale yellow, windows overlooking the cobbled street. At dinner in the restaurant below, I overheard a group talking about the upcoming winter festival, a parade, live music, lights everywhere. Part of me wanted to stay to see it, another part urged me on, as if the road still had more to reveal. Back in my room, I saw the letter I had written yesterday still in my bag. I opened it, read every word again. I changed nothing. I folded it, slipped it into an envelope, wrote Logan and Emily's names on it. But I still hadn't decided when or if I would send it. That night, I slept more deeply than on any night before, as if each turn of the wheels had carried away another layer of burden I once thought could never be set down. The next morning, when I went down to the inn's breakfast room, the atmosphere was already buzzing. Strings of colored lights were strung across the street, the sound of hammers and laughter rising from groups building the stage for tomorrow night's festival. A young boy ran past the door, clutching a bunch of bright red balloons, his breath leaving white trails in the cold air. I sat at a table by the window, ordered toast and fried eggs. The owner, a gray-haired man, asked if I would be staying for the festival. I smiled and said I wasn't sure, and he just nodded, as if he understood that sometimes people don't need a plan. After breakfast, I wandered through the streets. On the corner, an old woman sold handmade knits. I tried on a few pairs of gloves. She said, "These keep your hands warm, and your heart too." I bought a pair, not because of the cold, but to carry her words with me. At noon, I sat beside the fountain in the square. My phone buzzed a message from Logan this time, "Mom, I don't know where you are, but I hope you're safe." That was all. No apology, no argument. I read it over and over, sensing both distance and a door slightly ajar. In the afternoon, I decided to rent a bicycle and ride out of town. The narrow road wove through fields shrouded in mist, the smell of damp earth and dry grass tangling together. I felt my body clearly, my breathing, my heartbeat, my muscles tensing and releasing. Perhaps it had been a long time since I paid attention to myself in this way. When I returned, dusk had fallen. Lights were beginning to glow everywhere, reflected on the wet streets. I stood at the end of the road, watching the children rehearse for the parade, the beat of drums, the blare of horns. There was something in the air that made me want to join in, yet also to stand apart and just watch. That night, I took the letter out to the balcony, sitting beneath a heavy blanket. The festival lights diminished in the distance as the wind carried snatches of music toward me. I opened the envelope, read each word once more. This time, when I folded it again, I felt ready. Not to beg for change, but to close a chapter, regardless of the response. I placed the envelope on the table, ready to mail tomorrow. Then I sat still, listening to the blend of voices and music in the distance, like a soundtrack to a new life forming slowly, but steadily. The next morning, I went to the small post office at the end of the street. The wooden door creaked as I pushed it open, the smell of old paper and ink filling the air. The young clerk smiled and asked what I needed. I handed over the envelope, saying I wanted to send it by certified mail. When the red stamp pressed into the corner, I felt as if a piece of the past had just been sealed, ready to leave my hands. Stepping back out onto the street, the cold wind bit against my cheeks, but I felt lighter. Not because I had sent it, but because I knew I wouldn't be waiting for a reply to decide my next step. For the first time in years, I wasn't standing in the place of the one who waits. I spent the rest of the morning wandering around, buying a few small gifts for myself, an old leather-bound book, a jar of handmade orange marmalade, and a postcard showing the town in winter. I thought I might pin it to my wall when I got home, as a reminder that I had been here, had lived days just for myself. By afternoon, the festival began. The street sparkled with light, the smell of pastries and hot cocoa filling the air. I stood among the crowd, watching the parade go by, colorful costumes, thunderous drums, echoes of cheer. A little girl pulled her mother over to me and handed me a candy cane. I smiled, thanked her, and realized it had been a long time since a stranger had offered me an unconditional gesture like that. When fireworks burst open in the sky, I tilted my head back, feeling as if each flare fell straight into my chest, melting the last shards of ice inside. I didn't know where I would go tomorrow, but the thought no longer unsettled me. Back in my room, I made a cup of hot tea and sat by the window. Down below, people still danced in the streets, their laughter carrying upward. I suddenly realized I could love while keeping distance, I could remember without returning to old paths. And that sometimes, leaving isn't loss, but the opening of another horizon, where I could breathe without asking anyone's permission. That night, I slept to the echo of fireworks from afar, wrapped in a rare peace I hadn't touched in many years. The next morning, the town returned to its usual quiet, as if all the brilliance of the night before had been just a brief dream. I rose early, drew the curtains back, strips of colored paper still clung to the fences, a few deflated balloons lay crooked on the sidewalk, and a man swept the square with slow, steady movements. I brewed coffee, but after the first sip, I realized I didn't want to stay any longer. The calm I had found here had served its purpose, now it was time to carry it with me and move on. I packed my belongings, folding clothes, carefully placing the leather-bound book and the new wool gloves into my suitcase. Before leaving, I walked to the lake one last time. The morning water reflected a sky so clear, nothing like the gray murk that had greeted me on my first day here. I sat on the old bench, resting my hand on the cold wood. Each breath etched the moment into my memory, the scent of damp pine, the gentle lapping of waves, and the surrounding stillness. Back at the car, I noticed a folded note tucked into the rearview mirror. I opened it and recognized Logan's rushed handwriting. "Mom, if you're reading this, I want to say I'm sorry. I understand now." Nothing more, no long explanations. But unlike his past short, empty messages, these few words weighed more than any lengthy justification. I sat quietly for a few minutes, holding the paper, feeling its weight. I didn't know how or when I would respond, or even if I should respond right away. But I knew one thing, the relationship had shifted, even if just slightly. And this time, I wasn't the one running ahead to hold it together. As I drove out of town, I felt like I was leaving a chapter behind. The road stretched wide, trees fading in the rear view, and ahead, signs pointed toward places I had never seen. The uncertainty remained, but it no longer felt like a burden, it felt like an invitation. When the first rays of sunlight poured through the windshield, I realized, I could love without sacrificing myself. I could remember without returning to where I had been hurt. And most of all, I could move forward, fully, even while carrying things that remain unfinished. The car rolled on, leaving behind only the sound of the wind blending with my heartbeat, steady, calm, free. The road led me to a small hillside cafe, where a handwritten wooden sign reading "Open" swayed in the breeze. I pulled over, stepped inside. The smell of freshly roasted coffee spread through the room, warm enough to melt the chill from my coat. The barista, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, greeted me with a smile, without asking where I came from or where I was going. I chose a table by the large window overlooking the valley. White clouds drifted low, sunlight breaking through to cast shimmering streaks across the distant rooftops. I took out my notebook, and for the first time in months, I wrote without thinking about anyone else but myself. Not an explanation, not a to-do list for others, but simply lines about my feelings, free, yet not lonely, relieved, yet still tinged with a little regret. As my coffee grew cold, I saw outside the glass an elderly couple walking slowly, hand in hand. Their gesture was not showy, but it held a steadfast bond one once believed I would always have. Instead of bitterness, I just smiled, perhaps because I realized that some beautiful things don't have to belong to me. Before leaving the cafe, the barista handed me a pastry wrapped in paper, saying, "Something warm for the road." Such a simple phrase, yet it made me feel seen, cared for, even by someone who knew nothing of my story. I drove on, the road climbing higher before opening to a vast sky. Wind rushed in through the half-lowered window, carrying the smell of wild grass and pine resin. I thought about the note Logan had left, brief, yet enough to let me know that someday, when we're ready, we might talk again. But that day didn't need to be today. At dusk, I stopped at a scenic overlook. The setting sun bathed the distant mountains in gold. I stood still, feeling the cold air fill my lungs, and suddenly understood, I had stepped out of a cycle. No longer pulled into endless blame or expectation. When darkness began to swallow the horizon, I returned to the car. Ahead still lay a long road, and this time, I wasn't afraid to travel it alone. Because I knew that each step I took now was not to run away, but to move toward where I truly belong. I left the overlook when the sky held only a thin red streak stretched across the clouds. Streetlights grew sparse, replaced by the dim yellow glow of scattered houses along the hillside. I didn't turn on the radio, letting the sound of tires on the pavement and the wind in my ears underscore my lingering thoughts. Night fell quickly. I stopped in a small town barely large enough for a main street, a few shops still open, their lights casting onto the damp sidewalk. I chose a modest inn with an old neon sign that flickered unevenly. The manager, a woman about my age, asked brief questions, then handed me a key, as if accustomed to people who only needed a place to sleep and had no desire to explain themselves. The room was simple, beige walls, a bed with a clean quilted blanket. I opened the window, and the night breeze carried the smell of damp pine and, far off, the low, long call of a train. I lay down without turning on the light, letting the street's glow cast pale yellow squares on the wall. In the stillness, my phone buzzed softly. A message from Logan's number: "Mom, where are you? I just want to know if you're okay." I read it over and over, sensing the hesitation in each word. Not a direct apology, not a reproach either. Just a gentle touch, enough to tell me he was thinking of me. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I set the phone on the table, poured a glass of water, and sat by the window. Down on the street, a young couple laughed as they shared a bag of fries, the girl's coat draped over the boy's shoulders. The simplicity of that moment calmed me. Perhaps, I thought, love is like this journey, not always straight, nor always with a known destination. Sometimes, it's enough to know you're still moving, still open to what comes. I finished my water, closed the window, and crawled into bed. In the darkness, the train's whistle sounded again, fainter now but still clear enough to match its slow rhythm. I closed my eyes and let sleep take me, without trying to imagine what tomorrow would bring. Because for the first time in a very long while, I didn't feel the need to control everything. I only needed to be here, in this moment, knowing that I was okay. The lesson from the story, my son said, "Mom, come over less, it's a burden," so I took back the car I had just bought for him and his wife, is this: in family relationships, love must go hand in hand with respect. When boundaries are crossed and your presence is treated as a burden, silent endurance only deepens the wound. Sometimes, taking back what you've given not for the sake of material possession, but to reaffirm your own worth becomes necessary. Self-respect and clear boundaries preserve family bonds, instead of letting them fade away in resentment.